Managing across the life cycle. Module 2. Communication and Stakeholder Management. Lesson 2. Stakeholder Management and Communication. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 2, Stakeholder Management and Communication. In this lesson, we'll study the stakeholders for a service provider organization and managing stakeholders. First, let's look at stakeholders. A stakeholder is someone who has an interest in a project, or service, or organization. They could be impacted by or in a position to harm or benefit the project, service, or organization. Within the service provider organization, there are many stakeholder groups, for example, the service desk, support teams, and application teams. There are other stakeholder groups outside the service provider. This screen shows 3 possible stakeholder groups. The customers of a service provider are the people that define and agree the SLA targets. The relationship between a service provider and its customers is not necessarily commercial. Internal customers work in the same organization and the relationship is not commercial. External customers work for a third party and the relationship is commercial. The users are those who use services on a routine basis. And suppliers are third parties who supply goods or services that are needed to deliver IT services. Okay, we've looked at 3 possible stakeholder groups, but in practice there will be more. Not all of our customers, for example, will have the same interests or an equal power to influence events. Stakeholders must be identified on a case-by-case basis. The success or failure of any change initiative often depends on how well the stakeholders buy into the change. At the start of any project, the stakeholder groups should be identified and plans made, either to get their cooperation or neutralize their opposition. Let's now look at how these plans are made. The starting point is to identify each stakeholder group. The members of a stakeholder group should be easily identifiable. We are dealing with individuals here, not abstract groups. So, all company workers in California is an easily identifiable group, but all employees who welcome change is not. Some individuals may belong to more than one group of stakeholders. Next, we should understand and document how the project might impact them, and how they might impact the project. For example, do they see the project as a threat or an opportunity? What specific aspects of the project are relevant to them? What special knowledge or experience might they bring to the project? Now we are in a position to determine how the project will engage with stakeholders. For example, one-on-one meetings, workshops, the intranet, social media, and so on. We will be able to engage directly with some stakeholders, but for others, we may need to use some intermediary. It's difficult to engage directly with the public, for example. The next step to successful stakeholder management is to determine what information to communicate. The information should be tailored to address the concerns and interests of each stakeholder group. This encompasses what information should be communicated and what level of detail. Finally, remember that communication is two-way. Stakeholder management is not just about delivering information to stakeholders, it's also about learning from them. It's about getting feedback and acting on it, so a feedback mechanism must be included. It's often helpful to represent stakeholders and their interests graphically, using a stakeholder map. A high-level stakeholder map is shown on this screen. As a project proceeds further, more detailed maps will be developed. Potentially, there are a lot of stakeholders, and we have limited time and resources to engage with them. No stakeholder should be ignored, but our efforts should be directed where they will count the most. This screen illustrates a power impact matrix, which we can use to prioritize stakeholders. The vertical axis indicates the impact of the project on the stakeholder. The greater the impact, the higher up the stakeholder will appear. The horizontal axis indicates the influence of the stakeholder on the project. The greater the influence, the further to the left the stakeholder will appear. You can see that most of our efforts should be focused on stakeholders in the top left area. As the project moves forward, stakeholders change, individuals leave, new ones appear. The interests and influence of stakeholders change. People whose support we needed to get approval for a project do not have the same involvement as implementation approaches. The level of commitment of stakeholders will change. Those who were opposed initially may have been won over. Others who were once neutral may have become hostile. Stakeholder analysis and management is not a one-off task at the start of the project. It should be continually revisited through the project so that changes such as the ones on this screen are identified and appropriate action taken. Okay, let's do an exercise. The bank in this case study is working to integrate the recently acquired banks into its core operations. You are responsible for expanding the internet banking service to include their customers. What challenges might you face in identifying and managing the stakeholders? Aim to spend 20 minutes on this exercise. Don't forget to check your study guide for an example solution. You've completed Module 2, Lesson 2. In this lesson, you've learnt about the stakeholders for a service provider organization and managing stakeholders.